Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Widow podcast. I'm so excited this week. I'm so excited to be absolutely blessed to have the wonderful Marie from Empowered Through Grief come and talk to us today. We're going to be exploring a very interesting topic, sort of our loss of identity. Who are we in our new world? It's going to be amazing. Marie is amazing. I'm sure you all follow her on Instagram already, or Facebook. But if you don't, do, because she just shares so much wisdom, so much inspiration. I mean, Marie, I don't know quite how you do what you do in terms of the way you articulate your feelings and your thoughts around grief and loss. It's so powerful and it's so moving. I'm so jealous of the way you're able to write. It's amazing. But thank you. Thank you so much for giving your time to come and talk to us today, and welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your kind words. I spend a lot of time thinking about death. So that's where all the language comes from. But thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Oh, it's wonderful. Before we get into the nitty gritty, I'm sure most people know your story, but do you just want to share sort of a little bit about your story and what happened to you that sort of brought you here to where you are now?
Yeah. So I lost my life partner, my best friend, my person back in 2017. Andrea was the love of my life. And he was the strongest, fittest, healthiest person that I knew. We would fight all the time because he would play hockey like 2 times a week and baseball in the summer, and he was never home because he was so active. He would go to the gym every day. And then out of the blue, in the fall of 2017, he started having some pain in his abdomen. And I thought nothing of it because he was such a baby with physical pain. He would get a cold and be out in the bedroom for like 4 days. And he was like, I'm dying. So I thought nothing of this pain at all. But then the pain got, more and more intense to the point where he couldn't work anymore. He couldn't sit still. He couldn't sleep, and he started losing weight. And he was finally diagnosed in January. So January of 2017, he was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer, and he was given 3 to 6 months to live. And so that was obviously a huge shock. And that's the moment my whole life changed. Our whole life together changed, but my life changed quite a bit. And so I, right away, I remember after the diagnosis, I just took a few days off of work and we were home, and we were just kind of watching TV and hanging out and thinking about, like, how are we going to even tell people about this? And then I had to go back to work, and I was teaching at the time. I was teaching entrepreneurship to high schoolers. And I remember I had to go into the office and prepare things for an animation I was doing with kids. And I was in my office and I was like, what am I doing here? Like, this isn't where I'm meant to be in this moment. I am meant to be by his side every step of the way. And so I remember walking into my boss's office and crying and saying, I can't be here. I just had such a powerful inner knowing that I just had to quit work, and I had to just put all of life on pause just to be with him. And I didn't know what was going to happen. Obviously he was terminal, but you always have hope. So I quit everything, and I was with him every single day after that. We went through the whole, chemo treatment, just everything. We, cultivated the hope until the hope shifted into, like, the hope at first was like, he's going to be cured and he's going to be like the 4% who survive pancreatic cancer. And then the hope shifted into, more time. Like, we're just going to keep him here longer. He still has so much life to live. He was so young. He was only 44. And then the hope eventually shifted to, like, I just hope he has a good death, and he gets to live out the rest of his days in whatever way makes him feel like he's in control, and he wanted to die as he lived on his own terms. He was very, very adamant about that. And so I just became his person, his advocate, and the person that kind of stood between him and the rest of the family when everybody wanted him to keep pushing and fighting and like, you're gonna beat this. And he was like, no, I'm going down. Like, if I'm gonna go down anyway, I don't want to go down fighting and treatment. I don't want to be in the hospital. I just want to be home. I want to be with my loved ones. I'm dying, and I just want to die my way. And so I was with him until he took his last breath. And I don't know that I knew at the time. I mean, I obviously knew it was going to change me, but I don't think I knew how deeply it was going to change me, like on a human level, and also just my entire life. Like, I look around now at my life and I'm like, oh my gosh, nothing is the same, And yeah, that's what happened.
That's so powerful. And I think what's so wonderful about what you said there is that you really did listen to what felt right for you, didn't you? You didn't layer that with any stuff. You just listened to what you needed to do, what your body was guiding you to do. I'm doing it. I'm quitting my job. I'm gonna be with him. I'm gonna make sure that he, gets the life, the death that he wants. And you did that. And wow, I mean, what an amazing gift to give someone you love. The heartache that comes with it is horrendous, but a lovely thing to do for somebody that you love, and I'm sure he really treasured that. And it sounds like he was very open about, what he wanted and his death and stuff. But yeah, just, we have to find our way, don't we? But as you said there, just everything shifted, didn't it? Everything shifted, and everything does shift, which is super scary, isn't it? And we don't want it to shift. We want things to stay as they were. We didn't want it all to change. So at what point did you, I guess, realize or accept that this had changed you and your life in such profound ways, and that you allowed those changes to happen? Did you fight them at any point, or did you understand that was a part of the process quite early on?
It's such a good question. I don't think I fought the changes that were happening within me. I don't even think I can pinpoint a moment where I realized that I was changing. I really had this inner knowing. I've never felt more guided in my life and more in touch with my intuition than I did from the moment he was diagnosed until his death. I felt like I am exactly where I'm meant to be. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And there's nothing more important than this right now, and I had no doubts. What I was fighting with was the reality of what was happening. That I was fighting a lot. I felt like sometimes I felt like a 5-year-old having tantrums. I was in the car and I was screaming, I don't know at who. And I was just like, this can't be happening. So I was fighting the reality that he was dying. There was a lot of resistance there, obviously. But the changes that were happening within me just felt like, I don't know, they felt almost like so natural. It was just like, of course this would change me. Of course this would alter my entire life, my perspective on life, on love, on death. And so it just unfolded, I think, in a very like organic and natural way.
God, that is amazing. And actually, I mean, I know you work with a lot of people in grief. Would you say that you meet many others that feel like that? Or do you find that most people do fight it and find it quite hard to accept those changes?
I think grievers are so unique, I think that a profound death changes you. I think that I see, and not everyone, but most grievers I sit with do feel like they've been changed by death, by loss. And some of them just kind of like me, just roll with those changes, and there's an acceptance that of course I would be changed by this. And some of them fight it, of course. Some of them fight and they miss who they used to be. And yeah, there's that, that grief for our person, that grief for the life we had that can no longer be, the grief for the future that we were supposed to have that we no longer get to have, and the grief for the person we used to be before the diagnosis, before the accident, before the death.
Do you miss that person? Do you miss Marie, the person that was with Andreas and living that life with him and walking that path?
I miss him. I miss our life. I miss our love. I'm very comfortable with the version of me that I am now. It's almost like I don't feel like this has changed me. Like I don't feel like this has been a 180. It's almost like it's revealed who I really was all along, but it's just much more clear now, who I am, what matters to me, my values. So there's a clarity, but I think those pieces were there even before, even with him. Like I remember little glimpses of the things that mattered to me then, those are still the things that matter to me now. What I do miss though is I miss my, I don't know how to say it in English, but I miss being naive. I used to be very naive. I felt a little bit more maybe innocent. When he started having pain and he started losing weight and he started getting, obviously he was very sick. It never crossed my mind that he could have cancer and he could die. And that's the part of myself that I miss, because today, if I wake up with a headache, I think I have a brain tumor,
Same.
And if my mom recently had to go to the hospital because she was having chest pains, and I thought, you walk into the hospital and you walk out with a terminal diagnosis, and I'm like, I'm going to lose my mom. And when she walked out of the hospital and she was like, oh, it's okay, we're going to investigate, but the doctor sent me back home, I'm going to be fine. I'm shocked that she's not given a terminal diagnosis. So I have this, maybe health anxiety, or I'm just so aware that people die. And I'm so aware that it doesn't just happen to other people, because it happened to us. And I'm so it's almost like I'm waiting, who's the next person who's going to go. That's the part that the change in me that I dislike.
Yeah. Miss that kind of, ignorance isn't the right word, is it? We lived. I know exactly what you mean. Like you live in a bubble where stuff happens and people die, but it happens to other people, and you just feel like safe and untouched almost, don't you, in your little bubble? But then that bubble is burst, isn't it? And all of a sudden, all those horrible things that happen to other people happen to you, and then it just becomes so much more realistic that it could happen again. And you almost got, like you say, when you said that about never having a headache, it's a brain tumor. I'm exactly the same. Any slight pain or anything, it's like, it's kind of not funny, but you've got to laugh sometimes, haven't you? Because it can drive you absolutely insane. But I think it's so beautiful the way you feel like it's revealed parts of you that were there and that have been brought to the surface. And that's something I love to try and remind the people that I work with, is that this is going to reveal parts of you that you didn't know existed, but they are absolutely there, and they're going to make you so proud of who you become. And I think that's such a lovely way of looking at it. And just understanding that these things do shape us in life, don't they? They do have a profound effect on us. But I was looking through your stuff on Instagram, and I saw that you'd listened to a podcast with Liz Gilbert, and that had inspired you to ask your followers some questions, and it kind of inspired me to want to ask you the question. And you said in the podcast that instead of sort of saying, how are you, the podcast host asked Liz, didn't she, who are you now? So I'd like to ask you, Marie, who are you now?
Oh my gosh, it's such a big and hard question, but such a good one. Like, how do we define ourselves as individuals, as humans? Who am I think I define myself now, whereas before I might have defined myself by like the roles I used to play, or the things I used to do. I think now I define myself much more by my values and what feels meaningful to me in this version of my life, and in this version of my life where I'm so aware that everybody dies and where I'm like fearful of losing people. What matters to me now are my commitments. What matters to me now are my relationships with the humans that I love that are still here. What matters to me now is living a life that is of service in some way, taking this thing that I've been through that has felt like very dark at times, very painful, very just taking that despair, that hopelessness, that darkness, and somehow weaving light through it for maybe someone else, who's in the dark and who's in despair and who's in that hopelessness. So that is really what I think keeps me going, the feeling of being of service. Like if I write one Instagram post and it touches only one person and I don't do anything else with my life, I'm like, well, it will have been worth it, What matters to me now is my spirituality, my bond with Andrea. I still feel very connected to him. I feel like the work I do in the world is because of him, is with him. That matters to me. And I guess who I am, I'm someone who's trying to live with maybe more integrity, where my outer life now matches my inner life. And I fail at this all the time, but I strive to just live a life of integrity in line with the values I hold closest to my heart.
How did you go about discovering your values? Because it's big, isn't it? And it's something that I didn't really understand before my husband had died, and something that I've worked on and continue to work on, because I think they're kind of evolving for me still. But how did you, I mean, is that something you've always been aware of your values, or is it something that you've worked on since your loss?
I think I had a general idea of what mattered to me before, but it's almost like, uh, cancer, like a life-limiting illness, me being with Andrea, knowing we were facing death together, just really brought to the surface like so much clarity around what really matters. And so when he was still here, but he was sick, what mattered to me, it wasn't my job, because I quit my job, and it wasn't money or status or the material things we had. We both weren't working, so we were, it wasn't, suddenly it's like our careers didn't matter, our status in the world didn't matter, how much money we were making every month didn't matter. All that stuff just like went right out the window. And what mattered was time, the time we had together, the time we had with our loved ones. What mattered was us sitting and having really honest and truthful conversations and just connecting with each other. What mattered was allowing him to live out his death in integrity with who he was. And so all of those things that are still very much a part of my life now, it's like there was so much clarity when we were facing death. And I think I try, and it's hard, it's like I'm no longer living with cancer as a reality in my life day to day. So sometimes I forget, but I try to keep the end in mind. I try to keep in mind that life is really short, that I don't know how long I have. I don't know how long my loved ones have. And so keeping the end in mind allows me to just, again, have so much clarity around what matters. And what matters is love, commitment, doing work that feels meaningful, creating a context for my life that is meaningful enough that it can hold my pain, because I still carry a lot of grief, a lot of pain, and life is hard, and I'm I know that more hard things will come, but if I kind of create a meaningful life for myself, whatever hardships come my way, I'll be able to hold it, because my life, every day I wake up and I'm like, there's a reason I'm here, like this day feels meaningful and I have things to do. And so I don't know, it felt very, I didn't sit down and read a book, or I didn't do like an exercise with my therapist to find my values. I think they just unfolded over time as I kept remembering the reality that life is so finite, and that the time we spend with our people is limited, and keeping that in mind just really puts everything back into focus for me.
Do you think then it comes to light what you value through a very heightened self-awareness, like really understanding what helps you and what hinders you, and really kind of leaning into what feels good and allowing yourself to do more of that? Do you think that that's because it's hard, isn't it? Because I work with a lot of people that really struggle with this kind of knowing who they are at their core, like what's important to them. It's you kind of ask the questions and it's like, I don't know, because you're just so lost, aren't you, in that world of grief. And I think you're right, it does unfold over time for sure. But do you think it takes a certain level of self-awareness to allow that to be seen?
I absolutely, and I feel like in my own journeys, I'm almost 5 years out now, and I've had to really pay attention. It's almost like you have to pay attention to your life, to pay attention to what's happening inside you. And as you're moving through your life, I've had to notice, like what makes me feel alive versus what makes me feel apathetic, And at first, it's all about just witnessing. It's almost like I do this exercise with, I have a group for widows who are rebuilding kind of together and figuring out who they are and what they want in this next phase of life. And, the first month when we're together is just about just witnessing ourselves, just almost taking, like being an observer of ourselves, just noticing our emotions, noticing when we feel connected to joy and aliveness versus when we feel, that despair, that darkness come back. And then, okay, well, what did I do? What was I engaged in? Who was I connecting with that made me feel this way or that way? And then through becoming a witness of ourselves, I think we deepen that self-awareness, and we start to uncover, what helps us, what hinders us, what coping mechanisms. In the beginning, I think in early grief, we all have coping mechanisms that, we need to survive, but that eventually we grow out of, or we need to let go of because they no longer serve us. But all of that, yeah, it takes time, a lot of witnessing, a lot of self-reflection, a lot of, it's a process, and I think we want to wake up one day and have it all figured out. But I think that's a fantasy. I think we're going to spend our lives figuring ourselves out.
Do you know what? I think you're so right. We're all just winging it, aren't we? Like every day we're winging it and we're just trying to figure it out as we go. But it definitely, for me, in my journey, I have learned that I can and I do figure it out. And that's the point. I might not always have the answers, and I might not always know what it is I need or where I'm heading, but I know when I'm heading in the right direction and I know when I'm not. And I just think you've kind of almost got to just keep taking those steps that feel right and aligned. And you figure out the next step, don't you, as it comes, 100%. But did you have to try a lot of new things in order to discover what sort of fueled your soul, your passion, that those moments of joy, of enlightenment, of peace, contentment, did you try new things? Did you discover new things that allowed you to find that out for yourself?
Yes. So actually, I had a very interesting year after Andrea died. I gave myself a whole year, and this obviously was before the pandemic. So I know that my reality was different than a lot of grievers who are more early on in their grief. But I gave myself a whole year to just do whatever I wanted. And with no guilt. That's the key. No guilt. And I said, you know what? And I was also very bold in early grief because I had seen death, like I had seen it, and I was like, well, this is where I'm headed to, so I might as well just freaking live,
Yeah.
And I almost felt a bit fearless in that first year, which is interesting because it was obviously the hardest time of my life, but also the most bold and fearless time of my life. And I think that was really helpful for me, just to give myself permission to, I traveled a lot. Like I felt like I was crawling. I needed to crawl out of my skin. And so I was constantly trying to escape, I think, my reality and my day to day. And so traveled a lot, and I reconnected with friends I hadn't had time, to meet with in a long time because of everything I'd been through. I reconnected with my love of writing. So I used to love writing when I was young. Like I remember being a little girl and reading books after books after books and writing stories when I was like 7 years old. And I reconnected with this old passion of mine, that I had put aside because, life and, babies and everything. So I allowed myself to just reconnect with things that made me feel like creative and alive, and some people looked at me in that first year and said, you're escaping, you're actually escaping your reality. Like you're just trying to get out. You're trying to, push it down, or like, I don't know, just put it to the side and just, but I that's what I needed in that first year. I needed to escape. I needed to live. I needed to feel alive. I needed to write. I needed to figure myself out. And I gave myself permission to do that. And that felt like a very important part of my grief process, and I don't know in that first year if I spent enough time sitting with my feelings. It doesn't matter. I mean, that grief is always going to be with us. So there's going to be time to sit with the feelings when you're ready. But obviously I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready then. And I gave myself permission to do what felt right. And as you said, and as someone I admire a lot, she's a writer called Glennon Doyle. And she says, you just do the next right thing. Like you don't have to see the path in front of you, but there's an inner knowing about what's right. Like what is the next right thing for you? Like what's right in front of you, with what's right in front of you, what you need to be doing for yourself. And it's just about letting go of people's judgments and perception and stories about you, and just following that knowing and just doing the next right thing for yourself, and so yeah, that was a crazy year.
It sounds it, but just like you say, exactly what you needed to do. But how did you do that with no guilt? I mean, guilt is like just a constant companion of grief, isn't it? And it's something people grapple with so much of, how can I go off? How can I do things? How can I see the world? How can I have fun when my person has died? It's that feeling of betrayal almost. And I shouldn't be doing this. How did you let go of that?
There were two parts of me. There's the part of me that, of course, the survivor's guilt, and that I get to do this and he doesn't. That was present. But there was another part of me that was stronger at the time. And, Andrea did not want to die. And he was so angry in the face of his own death. And he felt like it was way too early. And I remember having many conversations with him. And I think that helped me with the guilt. Many conversations where he was like, you are so young. You have so much to look forward to. You have so much life to live. And if I could, I would live. I wouldn't put anything on hold anymore. I would live full out. He had a lot of regrets. And I remember one of the things he told a friend of ours when he was literally in the hospital on his deathbed. He told our friend Louis, he said, Louis, I have a big freaking box of regrets. And he's like, your only job in life is to make sure that your box is smaller than mine. And I was like, yeah, so that part of me that could hear him in my mind when the days I just wanted to kind of stay in bed and just be in the darkness. Obviously I had those days, but I could literally hear him in my mind saying, you have your health. What are you doing? You don't have pancreatic cancer. You're not like, you don't weigh 85 pounds on your deathbed. Like get up and go do something. Like there's sunshine outside. Like your son is wanting to play with you, or just there's life to be lived, and you get to live it. And so I heard him, and I think that voice was stronger than the voice of guilt.
God, you've made me go all funny saying all that. Like that, just so powerful. and so moving and so true. Like, it's almost, and it's kind of, obviously my husband died suddenly, so it was very different, but you know, I always think if he could have lived, like, he would be living full out. Like, who wants to die at 44? You know, and have that box of regrets of things you didn't do? Like, get out there, live the life, do the things, and you know, it does hurt, doesn't it? And there are days when it's just, oh God, so brutally painful. But that voice in your head, Marie, like, honestly, it's quite emotional to listen to and to hear, but so powerful. And I think that is almost a wonderful gift that he gave to you, isn't it? Those words, and via your friend Lewis, but just knowing that in your heart, almost like you say, giving yourself permission then to go and live the way you want to live, and make the most out of it. And I'm assuming that stayed with you throughout your journey.
Throughout. And you know what, he in life, he was always kicking my butt, you know. He was always like calling me out on my shit. He was like the voice of truth. Like, he could see me, you know, and he would know things about me that I didn't even know about myself. And so I feel like even in death, he's still kicking my butt, and he's still telling me, like, he's still the voice of truth, you know. And yeah, my connection with him has helped me immensely. And another thing that's helped with the guilt too, it's that, you know, I knew, like, our love was so deep and profound and life-changing for both of us, and I knew I would grieve him for the rest of my life. You know, there's not a day that I'm going to wake up and be done with it or be moved on from the pain I feel because he's not here. So I knew I was going to miss him forever. I knew I was going to cry over his death forever. I know my grief is going to be a part of me forever. And so, you know, me living doesn't feel like I'm forgetting, because I'm not forgetting, because he's, you know, his death is always with me. And that helps, you know.
It really does. I think there's a very large misconception, isn't there, in life, that if you are living a good life, a full life, a meaningful life, you have found new love, created joy, done something amazing, like, that takes away, diminishes somehow your love, your loss, your grief. And it doesn't mean any of those things. It does come with us, you know. We're not trying to move on from it, we're trying to move with it, because it's there, and it's always going to be. But it doesn't always look the way we think it looks, grief, does it? You know, I think we have this vision that grief is pain and heartache and tears and sorrow, and it is those things, but there's also so much more, isn't there, that you know, comes with us, that we, you know, I guess in how we behave and who we become as people, that is shaped by the grief, but it doesn't always look the way we think it's going to look. You said about creating a meaningful life, and that's sort of how you, I guess, define who you are in a way that helps you define who you are now. How did you go about creating something meaningful for you after your loss? Because that's really hard, isn't it? That's something I think a lot of people struggle with. I think there's also an idea that meaning has to come from something big, something outrageous, which I don't believe it does. So when you say you've created a meaningful life, how did you go about creating that? And what does that look like for you? Where is the meaning in your life?
Such a good question. And again, this is like a process and an unfolding. And I think these things take longer than we want them to take, you know? But at first it was about just noticing, again, when we go back to like just the witnessing of ourselves inside of our lives, it was about noticing what felt meaningless, you know? So at first the question wasn't, how do I create a meaningful life? It was like, what feels meaningless in my life right now? And And a month after Andrea died, I had to go back to work in my teaching job because they had given me 7 months off. And then I was going to lose my job if I didn't go back. So I had like 4 weeks to move out of our place and move back in with my mom. Just, I was in such a weird place, but I had to go back to work. And I remember just crying in the hallway in the staircase at my work every morning and calling my friend. And I was like, what am I doing here? I don't want to be talking about entrepreneurship with kids. I mean, it was meaningful enough when Andrea was here, and I derived so much meaning from our relationship and from our family life and from what we were building together. But without him, my job just didn't feel meaningful enough. And I didn't want to go. I had to go because I had to pay the bills, but I didn't want to go. So I knew that, again, is like this inner knowing of like, okay, if my job doesn't feel meaningful anymore, I'm going to have to do something else. And it took years for me to kind of shift away from that job. But I knew in my heart that I had to do something else. Like I had to do work in the world that felt meaningful enough that I wanted to get up every day, because I'm someone who feels very deeply. I'm very, very sensitive. So grief is very hard for me because I can fall back into despair, into depression easy. And so for me, creating a meaningful life is literally survival. If my life feels meaningless, then I won't want to get up every day, and I'm going to stay in my bed. I'm really going to stay there. I'm not going to be like, I'm not going to be adulting. And so I knew I had to find work in the world that felt meaningful, and meaningful to me meant being of service in some way. And that's the reason I went into education in the first place. I was never someone who kind of dreamed about climbing the corporate ladder. Like that did not bring me a sense of meaning. And that's just me. I'm not saying that there's not a right or a wrong way to go about creating a meaningful life. It's a very personal journey. But I've always worked with youth. I've always worked in education. I always worked to create experiences where kids could discover who they were, like apart from just going to class. And so I don't remember where I was going with this, but anyway.
I love that.
But that didn't work for me anymore. So yeah, being of service in some way. So I felt like I was of service to the youth I was working with, but that was no longer enough. And so I just had to follow my intuition again. And I started writing about my grief, at first for myself, and then publicly but anonymously on Instagram. And then I started connecting with, like-minded women who were also living with the loss of someone they couldn't live without, and then I saw so much pain, and I saw a need for connection, for community. I saw women who felt really alone and really isolated, especially young widows. Like I was 32 when Andrea died, and I didn't know anyone except my grandmother, who was a widow. And so by writing on Instagram, I got to connect with other young widows who also felt very alone, who felt like there were no resources where they were in person, and it felt like aliens walking this world, just living with something so painful and difficult, but walking that journey all on their own. And so from there, I started having just a little, like an idea, like I have to do something. And I didn't necessarily know it was going to become kind of my work in the world or my job, but at least writing and connecting and bringing people together felt so meaningful to me that I just kept doing it every single day. And then eventually that became, the business I have now and the community that I have now, which brings so much meaning to my life.
And to many others. What you do, your work, I know helps so many people in so many ways. You sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your insights. You are born to do it, and it does. You do it so beautifully. But I think you're right. It is that self-awareness, working out what helps us, what fuels us, what hinders us, what takes away from us, and really following our intuition. And I think we sometimes forget to do that, don't we? Of what feels right, leaning into what feels right, because we're so busy trying to please other people and do things the right way, and be a certain person to fit in with what society tells us that we should fit in with, rather than leaning into what feels right for us, because we are all so different, aren't we? And we all do this in our own unique way. But again, it's time as well. It's time to figure all this stuff out. And it, to your point, it takes a lot longer than we want it to take. We desperately want the answers a lot sooner than we get them, and that's hard. That's hard, that waiting game. When talking about identity and who we are, I love how you spoke about it in terms of basing it on your values, who you are at your core, what's important to you, what brings meaning to your life. A lot of the time, when you ask somebody who are you, they will give you labels, won't they? Like I'm a wife, I'm a husband, I'm a mum, I'm a sister, I'm a nurse, I'm a veterinarian. Whatever the labels are, the roles that we play in life. And I've been sort of thinking about this a lot recently. I've been reading about it, and we have over here a fantastic doctor turned motivational speaker, author, called Dr. Chatterjee. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's just written a book, and in it he talks about our identity and who we are at our core. And actually how it's not always that helpful to identify with our roles in life, because those labels, those roles that we play can be taken away from us, can't they? And somebody might die, you're a mother, your kids might grow up and they leave home, you're no longer need that empty nest syndrome. You've got a job, you're a successful accountant in a law firm, the law firm collapses and you've got no job. You're left feeling stripped of your identity, of who you are. And this happens a lot, and you must see it in grief as well. When you have a profound loss, when somebody significant dies and it takes one of those roles away from you, it leaves you feeling very isolated, alone, scared, unsure, uncertain of who you are and where you fit in the world. So do you think it's more helpful to lean into our values to describe who we are as a person, as opposed to the roles and the identities that we have in life?
I think so, 1,000,000%. And that's my opinion. And that's the way I go about my work as well, in my coaching practice with the women who I'm so blessed to work with. But I always say, goals are good. And, it's good to set goals and have a sort of a plan on, what we want to achieve and who we want to be in the world. But things outside of us can be taken away. And we've had this experience firsthand of something outside of us being taken away. And that identity that was wrapped up with that thing or with that person just goes away, and sometimes from one moment to the next. And so, for example, in my work, when I work with someone who really, let's say a widow who wants to be repartnered, because she thrives in a relationship and she thrives in partnership, and that's where she feels most fulfilled, and that's where she derives a great sense of meaning. We work on, because not having that relationship is very painful. So we work on, obviously a core value for her would be love and connection. And how can I cultivate love and connection in my life every day? Even if I'm not in a committed partnership, even if I'm not married to my person because he died, beyond the things we want, underneath the things we want, there's a value that's important to us. And what is that? It's like getting to the core of why do we want the things we want, and if we want to be in a partnership, it's because for us, love, connection, relationships mean a lot to us. And you get to cultivate that right now, even as a widow, with the loved ones that you have that are still here, with your friends, with, with your parents, if you're lucky enough to have them, with your kids, if you have them. And so I definitely think that getting down to beyond what do you want or what goals you want to set for yourself, like, why do you want the things you want, and then can you cultivate those values and those qualities in your life right now. And something else I try to do in my own life is, I don't, I no longer do like 5-year plans or like what do I see myself doing in retirement. Like, I don't know if I'm going to get there. I don't know if I'm going to be hit by a bus tomorrow. So that doesn't connect with me anymore. Making plans. I don't have the same relationship with making plans as I used to. But I try to ask myself, how do I want my life to feel? Instead of like, what do I want to accomplish, or what do I want to get, or what goals do I want to set? I'm like, no, how do I want my life to feel? What do I want to cultivate in my life? And right now I'm really working on kind of cultivating more joy and more peace and more calm. And that's something I can aim for every day, and I can work on every day, no matter what's happening outside of me. Like, no matter if, more loss happens, or I'm having a bad grief day, or, I'm currently moving through a breakup, and I've been talking about it a little bit on my page. So if those who follow me will know, but that has been really, really difficult for me. So, but every day, by asking myself, how do I want my life to feel, I get to kind of shift closer to living in alignment and living in integrity with who I really am, in a way that isn't dependent on anything outside of me, or dependent on me having the perfect relationship, or having the perfect business, or, having an X amount of money in my bank account, or, it's independent of all of these things over which I really have no control.
Yeah, 100%. It's very much, isn't it, focusing on the things that we can control. And I think what we need in the present moment, it is sometimes nice to have goals and ideas for what you're working towards and striving for, but we don't always know, that that's going to be there for us, that we'll make it there, or even that's what we'll even want at that point. Because we change, we keep, we kind of, you think you want this thing, and then actually you start going down this path and you think, oh, no, I don't, I want that thing. It's like, it's kind of allowing yourself, I guess, to be fluid in it all, isn't it? Do you think we ever get to a point in life where we are fixed on who we are? We understand our core values, we understand what's meaningful to us, that we get to this destination where we have complete clarity on all of those things? Or do you think it is being more fluid and allowing the ebb and flow of life to take us sometimes in directions that we hadn't thought of or planned, because that's just what feels right, and we're constantly evolving?
Oof. I think both. Can I say both? I mean, I think that there's a core, we have we have like a soul, and there's, one of my core values is love, connection, commitment to the people in my life. I can't imagine a day where that will no longer be something I care about, so I think that there's a core of who we are that remains. But then how does that manifest in your life? Like, what does it look like in your life? That gets to shift and ebb and flow. And how I'm living out my values today might be very different than how I'm living them out in 10 years, because I think we're always becoming. I don't think that there's a point where you stop growing and learning and becoming. Maybe, I don't know, maybe when you figured it all out, maybe you die. I don't know.
That's the end point. You've learned everything you need to know.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, at least speaking for myself, I know that I'm constantly becoming. Like, I don't feel that I'm going to reach a point where I'm going to be like, I have all of this figured out. Like, I think I constantly feel like a student of this really beautiful and challenging and hard life that we get to live.
Are you comfortable with that? Because I know, like, you know, we've kind of touched on it, haven't we, that in our grief we want all the answers. We want to know where we're heading, who we're going to become, who we are as people, how to create a meaningful life. And as we said, you know, it does take a really long time. And now you're comfortable, I say comfortable, you're accepting of the fact that takes time. I'm not sure comfortable is the right word. Was there a point in your journey, in your grief, where you became frustrated, where you were like, I need to know, I need this to hurry up, I want to know what the answers are, and I want to get there quicker than I'm getting there at the moment?
I mean, I think I'm still that way. I want all the answers. I want someone to give me a 10-step plan for how to do life, how to do life with like a minimum amount of suffering. I am never comfortable with the fact that sometimes I feel like I have very little control over how my life just kind of unfolds. And I'm not comfortable with that. I don't know. I mean, I think you have to reach a really high level of enlightenment to be fully surrendering to the flow of life and grief and loss. And yeah, that's not me. I'm in constant resistance. I go to my therapist. I'm like, tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix this. Yeah, not comfortable, but constantly learning and striving and surrendering again and again and again and again, but always in discomfort.
Love it. Do you have any sort of unhealthy coping mechanisms when you're in that space that you know you really shouldn't be doing, that you're maybe leaning on or using as a way to block that discomfort somehow, or do you just allow yourself to sit in it and go, I know this is going to be awful, but I will come out the other side?
Yes, I mean, I'm a very controlling person. If I could, I would control all of my life and all of the people in it, and I would just tell everybody how to behave. Because I know what they need to do in order for all of us to be happy. Okay.
I love your honesty.
And it upsets me very much when my people don't listen to me because I know what we need. Control is something I go into a lot, trying to control my circumstances, my life, trying to control other people in my life, their actions. I go there really easily, as soon as there's uncertainty, as soon as someone, just with my recent breakup, it's just, I'm learning to let him be himself, but I have tried to control him and I have tried to make him do what I want him to do. And just, we all know that doesn't work. And so, but yeah, control is kind of the beast that I have to constantly grapple with and say, you know what, I'm not in control. And can I just surrender and just try to cultivate this trust and faith that even if life is unfolding in a way that in the moment I feel is wrong or bad, or I don't want this, can I cultivate the trust and faith that maybe on the other side of this, there is something that I actually need? Maybe I'm not getting what I want, but maybe I'm going to get what I need. Wow, this is very hard for me.
I know it is so hard, and that I know there's so much going on for you at the moment, but what I think is just so wonderful is that you absolutely own it. You're not lying to yourself, are you? That you are completely aware of who you are and what you try to do and live your life. And I think that's a really important message for people. Like, we all have nuances, things, facets, pieces of us that that don't always serve us. They do in some areas of our life, but in others they don't. And it's understanding that we can't be perfect. We're not going to be able to control all these pieces of us and make them work in beautiful, energetic ways. And sometimes they do work against us. but we have to accept that almost sometimes, don't we? We're not striving to be perfect. We're just striving to be a little bit better today than we were yesterday, maybe, and learn from how we've been, how we've behaved, the thoughts that we've had, and you know, I guess try and do things a little bit differently if they've caused us some discomfort or some suffering in how we've been with those parts of us in our lives. But it's not easy. It's not easy, is it? It's not as easy as just recognizing these things and going, oh yeah, okay, that's what I'm doing, I'm going to stop. If it was that simple, we'd all have this figured out, wouldn't we? But you're right. And I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned in my journey is, you know, we think we have the answers a lot of the time, but we really don't. There's very little that we know about what's coming, and sitting in uncertainty feels a lot more uncomfortable sometimes than others, for sure. After a death, after a breakup, after, you know, these life events that happen that shift us into something that we don't know, that we don't understand. But knowing that on the other side of uncertainty, you're going to be okay. And for me, I just have to keep reminding myself of that. You know, when you're going through difficult times, heartache, challenges, it is really difficult, isn't it? It takes so much out of us, and it brings up so much grief as well, because, you know, when we go through something else, and challenges are going to keep happening, aren't they? Things are going to keep happening to us in life. You just, you know, if you get one thing, doesn't mean you're not going to get any others. But learning that, yeah, you've got to go through the process and hope that on the other side of that, there is happiness for you, and holding on tightly to that, because, you know, otherwise it can just feel too heavy. I know for me anyway, I really like to hold on to that.
You said something so profound there. It's like trusting, you know, that on the other side of the hard thing, you're going to be okay. And I think getting back to the conversation on identity, you know, when you're rebuilding after a big loss, when you're getting more clarity around who you are, what matters to you, and you're cultivating a life that feels in alignment with those core values, you know, with what really, really matters, you are literally rebuilding solid ground beneath yourself. And the bad things out there will keep happening, because that's the nature of being a human in this world. You know, life is hard, but there's ground now beneath you to hold you. You know, you are going to be okay. And it's like, when something else comes for you, the ground doesn't swallow you whole anymore, because you have rebuilt something that is independent of what's happening out there. You've rebuilt something from within, you know, your sense of self from within. And I think that is something you can believe in, and you can trust in, and you can lean on, you know, and that's what I'm feeling now in this season of my life as I'm moving through this breakup. It's like when Andrea died, the ground swallowed me whole, you know, because so much of myself was wrapped up in him and us. I didn't fully know who I was, you know, especially without him. And in the process of kind of healing and rebuilding after his death, I have rebuilt a sense of solid ground. And so now, you know, this hard thing is happening to me, but I don't feel as untethered as I felt when Andrea died, you know, because I feel like, well, there are some really core pieces of my life and of myself that are still here. And yeah, this thing, you know, isn't here anymore, but all these other things are here, and I'm still feel held by my life, if that makes sense.
It makes complete sense, and it's something, you know, it's one of the sessions that I hold in my program, is building those solid foundations. You know, like, you wouldn't build a house on a bed of jelly, would you? You know, it's not going to stay standing for very long. It's going to be very easy to knock down, and trying to rebuild the house again is going to be a nightmare. And it is having that solid ground, those solid foundations that you can build up from, so that, you know, when life does happen and maybe knocks you down a little bit, it's going to be harder to knock you down because you've got those solid foundations. But equally, if something does, you are able to rebuild again upon those foundations, and it allows you to feel tethered to something, as opposed to just completely, swallowed up by it all, and trying to claw yourself out of a very deep and dark hole. So yeah, I can completely relate to that. So what would you say, Marie, then is the biggest thing that your grief has taught you? And not that it has to, but I know it has. I have gained a lot from my loss, and I've learned a lot from it, about life, about myself, about other people. What's been your biggest learning? What has it given to you?
Oof, it's hard to pinpoint just one,
Mm.
and again, not that my loss had to teach me anything, but it's like this loss happened, and so there was learning, from it. So much, I guess it just gave me a whole other perspective on life, where I used to think, oh, life is long and we have a lot of time. And so I guess I used to take certain things for granted, even if they felt very meaningful and important, like time with my loved ones, or how I show up in my relationship with my son. Those things have changed because I no longer take time for granted at all. There's not one single morning where I drop my son to school that I don't give him an extra hug just in case, and that can feel, for some people who haven't been through loss, that can feel like, oh my God, like there's something seriously wrong with you.
Yeah.
But but it's not morbid or anything. It's just it's he's here, we're here now, and we're just gonna hold on a little bit more because this matters, and we love each other. And so I think I love my people more, deeper, or at least I try, and again, I'm so imperfect. So everything I'm saying, I fail at things often, but I remind myself to be more present, to make more time, to call that friends, to show up for the people in my life when they need me. I think I'm more patient, with my loved ones. I think I'm better able to meet people where they're at. Um, I think I have a hell of a lot more compassion, a lot more empathy for human suffering, you
Mm.
know,
Mm.
and I have a real desire to not bypass or try to fix the suffering in other people, but I have like a real desire to go and sit in the suffering with another human, because that's the thing that has really helped me in my own grief and in my life.
Mm.
Having people who don't look away, who don't turn away, who don't get uncomfortable, who don't try to fix, but who just join me in the suffering so that I feel a bit more human and a bit less alone. And I think maybe that might be one of the biggest things I've learned from my
Mm.
grief is how to be with the suffering that is an inherent part of being a human. And I think I do that so much better for my loved ones, for my clients, yeah, just for all the humans in my life.
Mm. I think so beautifully put, Marie, because we're not very good at being with people, are we? And witnessing people's pain and hurt and grief. We want to fix people as human beings. Like we want to fix things, and pain makes us feel deeply uncomfortable. But to find someone, I think, in your heartache, in your pain, that will sit beside you whilst you hurt, witness you, make you feel seen and heard and validated, and not make you feel like you're being judged or criticized because you're getting it wrong with sometimes the things that they say. And it does take a very special person to be able to do that, and you are a very special person. So I think that's such a wonderful gift to give to others in their time of need, because there's so much healing in that space. It doesn't feel like it at the time always, but God, it's powerful. It's super powerful. So what advice would you give, Marie, now to yourself to other widows in the early days, you know, now being sort of nearly 5 years in, and you know, still grieving, still feeling the emotions and going through life stuff? What would you go back and say to that early widowed Marie that might help others that are you know, in the early days of their grief now, and struggling with who they are?
Hmm. I think if I could go back and just like tell myself anything, it would be like there's no fire under my butt. Like I can just slow down, take my time. I really had such a sense of urgency that I had to, and I didn't even understand my own suffering that well back then. So I was trying to fix myself. I was
Mm,
trying to, I was asking people for the answers. I was asking my therapist for the answers. I was asking these spiritual guides for answers. I was asking psychics for, I was
and Google, don't forget Google.
Google, right? Of course. I was just trying to fix, and I had a real sense of urgency that I must figure this out now. Um, and if I could go back and if I could tell anyone anything, it would be just, it's okay to slow down. And in fact, in moving more slowly, I think that's when we have the space and the time for the self awareness that we are cultivating and that we need. We have the time to be a witness to our own selves inside of this grief. I had to learn to get to know my grief, and it took me maybe 2 full calendar years to really understand how my grief manifests in the different seasons of it, in the, depending on the time of the year, and how am I going to feel. Andrea died in the summer. So how do I feel in the summer versus how do I feel in the fall, on the other
Mm,
side of the big
mm,
anniversaries. And so slowing down, being a witness to your own life, being a witness to your own suffering, understanding how your suffering, you know, manifest. Like, what does it make you do? What are your coping mechanisms? What are the things that you turn to when you're deep in the dark of grief? Like, understanding all of these things about myself has been so valuable. And then once you know yourself, you understand yourself, then you get to make different choices if you want to make different choices. But before you get to know yourself in grief, you can't even choose, because most of it is just unconscious. We're so
mm,
uncomfortable, and we're just, acting out in all these ways to try to fix and feel better and just, numb, avoid, push down, whatever. So just slowing down, and this is going to take the time it's going to take anyway. I wish someone had told me that. There's no, you can try to move fast, you can try to outrun your grief, but the grief is going to unfold on its own time. And so it's almost like just
mm.
surrendering to it and just allowing it to be wild and untamed for a while.
Yeah, yeah. Wise, very wise words. You know, some real golden nuggets in there, Marie, because you're right. And I think, it's hard though, isn't it, when you're in that pain, that deep, raw grief, like you just want to get out of it. You want to know when it's going to be over. I did exactly the same thing, asking people, finding groups, like, when did you do this? And when did you feel that? And when did you get remarried? And when did you get a job? And when did the pain stop? And all that kind of stuff, because you want timelines, but there aren't any. And to your point, we will do this at our own pace, at our own time, and that's just the way it is. And surrendering to it, slowing down and taking your time is sound advice, but I know so hard
So
to
hard.
take on, so hard to take on when you're in it. But I mean, Marie, I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. I wish we had hours. I'm gonna have to come over to Canada and hunt you down.
Please come over anytime.
I would love that. I would absolutely love that. But I mean, you've shared so much. You've shared so very much, and I'm so grateful to you for opening your heart. But just let people know what you do now, Marie. I know you help people in many ways through different griefs and different programs. So how can you help? And if people want some help from you, how can they go about finding more out about it?
Yes, so I am a coach and I am also a certified death doula. And so my work is really to provide a space where women get to just be with the fullness of their grief and the fullness of their humanity. And they get to tell the truth about what it's really like. And they get to kind of process the complexity of grief alongside another human, which is me. And so we get to just be, we get to enter the vortex of your grief and your suffering, and we get to make sense of what's happening to you, you know? And so I do individual grief support, so one-on-one, and I also run a couple of different types of groups because I find that there's a lot of power in bringing people together, because one of the main points of suffering is this sense of isolation. You know, grief and trauma really separates us from other people. And so I kind of try to bring people together to kind of bridge those, just like create relationships and create bonds and try to break that sense of isolation that so many of us feel. So some of the groups that we'll be running in the fall, I always run Sisterhood in Grief, which is for early grievers. It's 3 months long and we get to walk through the holidays together. So I've been doing this for the last 2 years and it's been so wonderful because the holidays, especially when it's the first time you move through, you know, Thanksgiving and Christmas and entering a new year where maybe your person has not lived in this new year, it's very hard. And so we get to do that together and we get to be in all the feelings together. So that's Sisterhood in Grief. And then I run Rebuild and Rise, which is so special to me, which is longer. It's 6 months long. And again, it will begin again in the fall. And this is for the widow who's in kind of the middle phase of her grief. So she's not an early griever, you know, she's kind of been in the dark with the untamed grief for a while. And now her head is kind of above water and she's looking around and she's like, what is my life? What do I want to do? Like, how do I want to rebuild? And what would make life feel meaningful for me? And it can be a really confusing and lonely place to be. And so we get to do that together. We get to navigate just getting to know ourselves and figuring out our values and trying new things. And we get to just navigate sometimes dating again, or, you know, going on a first date, or the first time we're intimate with someone else, or, you know, shifting careers completely, going back to school. We get to go through all of these things together. And so yeah, that's what I do. And those two groups will be opening again in the fall. I'm going to be taking some time off this summer to kind of rework the curriculum. I have some beautiful collaborations coming in as well. I work with a trauma counselor who is going to come in and explain the difference between grief and trauma, because so many of my clients do have trauma inside of their grief, and we get to tend to trauma very differently than grief, you know. And so I'm going to get some extra support around that in both of the groups. And so, yeah, I'll be working on that this summer, and I'm very excited to kind of, you know, open that up again in the fall for my community. And until then, you know, I'm very active on Instagram. This is where I put out all of my thoughts and I have many thoughts on grief.
Many powerful thoughts.
So, you know, you can find me almost every day on Instagram at empowered_through_grief. Come and say hi. You know, I run this thing all by myself. And so my mom helps me a little bit sometimes when I get overwhelmed. But if you write me a message on Instagram, I am the one who responds to every single message. I try to respond to most of the comments. Sometimes some might fall through the cracks, but I'm very active and I really try to create a sense of community, you know, in the space that I'm creating. So yeah, come and say hi.
You do. I will put all of those links in the show notes so that people can easily access them there as well, to your website, to your groups, to your Instagram as well, so that people can follow those. And I mean, are the groups, they're for all grief, are they, or just for widows? How do you?
So Sisterhood in Grief is open to all types of losses. And so we
Okay.
have a mixed group. And then Rebuild and Rise is really for widows who are
Okay.
navigating partner loss. And a widow, it means, I mean, you don't have to be married. It's just if you lost someone,
Yeah.
you're building a life with. Yeah. So that
Yeah.
one is just for widowhood.
Yes. Yeah. Marie, honestly, you are such a beautiful soul. You really are. You are just so inspiring and so nurturing. Like everything that you write really kind of grabs you right here in the heart. The way you are able to articulate what we go through and how we feel and the thoughts we have is nothing short of extraordinary. It really is. You are a unique soul, and you help so many. And thank you for that. It's brilliant. I know you helped me on my journey after my husband died. Well, it was a couple of years, I think I found you afterwards, but just amazing what you have created. And I just want to thank you again so much for your time, for your wisdom, for your energy, everything that you have shared today. I know everyone is going to absolutely adore this conversation and probably listen to it more than once because it has just been incredible. So thank you. Thank you so much, Marie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you for being in my world, in my life. I'm grateful for you.
Oh, bless you, Marie. You take care. Thank you.